Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I want to start this podcast with a little story, if you don't mind. Well, I say you don't mind, you've got no choice really. I'm starting this podcast with a story, simple as that. A couple of years ago, this gentleman to my left-hand side, your right-hand side, texted me and he said, George Earthy is the one. So I was like, what do you mean? He said, all this talk about Mubama and Marshall and that. He said, but actually, I've been to the under-18s. George Earthy is the one. So anyway, when I watched under-18s digitally, it was difficult to really get a grasp of it. You could see him in highlights, he was scoring goals and getting assists, but it was difficult to get a really good understanding of the players themselves. You need to see them live, I think. So when I did go to see the under-18s for the first time live, there was two players that stood out for me. Lewis Orford and George Earthy. Now, in that game, Mubama scored a couple, might have even got a hat-trick. Marshall didn't score in that game, but Mubama certainly did anyway. But Orford and Earthy were the two that stood out for me. Anyway, fast forward 2 years, Frankie, I'm going to say, well done, my friend, because you get a lot of you heard it here first claims. In the build-up show, it's a thing. I like it. Sufal's going to get his first goal today. You heard it here first. That is the first person I've heard say it. But George Earthy, I can say that you, for me, were the first person to claim that he was going to go on and do it. Now, he's got a long way to go to do it yet, but he's got his first ever goal for West Ham. Nobody can take that away from him now. He's done that. That's it. He's there. He's in the history books of West Ham. He's an academy graduate that's come through and got a goal for the senior squad. A very pleasing moment at the end of the season.
Yeah, really good. Really nice to see. I'm going to be honest, there's probably many that I've got wrong before this one. So I really went quite heavy on a guy from Man City called Liam Delap. There is a connection to the other Delap name in football. And I mean, he scored... he broke records, just scoring goals in the youth team, broke through and can't score a goal to save his life. I think he might even be at Hull now, but he's been to Preston, he's been around. So it doesn't always work out that way, but it was just one that, just watching the youngsters, he just really stood out for me. Even in this pre-season, they played down at Ebbsfleet, which is just up the road for me, so we all went down there. And I'd been buying, my boy had been buying some cards of his, so we took them along to get signed, nice George Earthy cards. And he stayed around until after the game and come over, had a nice chat with him. And he said, look, it was really clear that the youth team are not allowed to sign autographs in their warm-up. They take it very, very seriously. But he did say, if you hang around, I will come over and have a chat with your boy. So he did make the effort in the warm-down. He came over, and even though the coach was giving him a little bit of a dig, saying, no, concentrate on your warm-down, he did take the time out. So really nice of him and great character. But yeah, just watching him and being at the FA Cup game and following that season towards the FA Cup, and even well before that, like you say, when it was under 18s, he just looked like a Rolls Royce of a player. He's just great on the ball, just could pick a pass. He reads the game exceptionally well. I still think he looks a little bit lightweight at the moment. I'd like to have seen him fill out a little bit more by now. But in terms of footballing ability, I have absolutely no doubt, and had no doubt, that he was the one who really did stand out for me. And it was just great to see, to have the character to come on, have that situation happen to you where you end up with a really bad whack like he did. A lot of youngsters could have gone in hiding at that point, and it could have really knocked him. And he didn't. He was straight back in the first opportunity he got. He was straight back on that pitch and doing his thing. And just the goal for me was great. He sort of picked up a position in the box. He was like, he put his head down. He had a little wiggle. He was like, I'm going to get to this ball, and it was. He read it perfectly. He knew exactly where that ball was going to be. As soon as Kudus made that run to the byline, he knew, I've got to get in front of that defender, and there's every chance the ball's going to come to me. And that's brilliant. We haven't seen any of that for quite a while from a youngster. So no, mate, great to see.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the interesting thing, perhaps, is he was next to Jared Bowen, who stood still. And this isn't a dig at Jared Bowen. My point is that's how good the movement was from Earthy, that he read the play and he ended up moving across the face of three Luton players. There's three Luton players between him and Kudus that he bypassed in order to get to the ball at the front post. The movement is fantastic. The finish is really good. But like I said, Bowen was one that was stationary. He stood still. And I rate Bowen a lot. And that just goes to show how good that bit of play from Earthy was. And I agree with you. When I saw him live for the first time, I thought, this kid he looks special. He's very elegant on the ball. The way the ball sort of sticks to his feet. He doesn't necessarily run like Kudus with it, but he can dribble a bit like Jack Grealish with it. And I'm not comparing in terms of ability or levels of ability, in terms of just how they move with it. It's not pace, it's just clever runs. And he's got that little bit of arrogance about him as well, which I think you need. And you've seen it against Luton, but you saw it against Fulham briefly before the collision happened. But against Luton especially, there was a bit with Paqueta where they did like 5 or 6 passes between each other in a space of 3 yards. It was almost like two flair players just turning into peacocks, going, you know what? Let's show our feathers off today. We're 3-1 up. The sun's shining. The fans are having a good time. Let's just put on a little bit of entertainment for the fans. And I liked it a lot to have that confidence go out on the pitch and to start doing that around established players for Luton and West Ham. I really liked it, and it's somebody I've got high hopes for. But I have to agree with what you said in terms of his physicality. I've always been. All season, I've said on pitch, and I think Earthy's got the ability, but I didn't think he'd get an opportunity under David Moyes because he's lightweight. I thought he was too small. He got struck off the ball very easily, and that would prevent him from getting the game. Now, to some extent, I would argue I was correct, because I would strongly argue he hasn't been given an opportunity, and the chance he has had, he's taken it, but it's 15 minutes in the last home game of the season. I don't think that's a chance. That's just minutes for the sake of it kind of thing. But I remember when we did an interview with Mark Phillips on Patreon, and Gonzo sort of brought up his lack of physicality, and Mark Phillips just said, look, Modric is small. And that was a response that just killed it dead. As I say, you don't need to be big to succeed in the Premier League. And I thought that was interesting. Do you want me to start? There's 2 angles I want to go here, Frankie. There's a negative one, and then there's a hopeful one. Which one do you want me to start with first?
Let's get the negative out of the way.
All right. Well, where's he been all season? Because he was fantastic last season. He started the season really good. Now, if the first team are performing to a really high standard, it is very difficult to put players in. I get it. I understand why, say, Kadua would struggle to get into the first team a bit because of Kudus and Bowen out in that right wing. I get it. I get why it's difficult. But from January onwards especially, we've had an out of form Fornals, who left the club, had an out of form Said Benrahma, who left the club. But let's just give Moyes the benefit of the doubt in the sense that he kept playing those two, even though they weren't great to see. There was 2 senior players there to fill that left-hand side of the number 10 role. Fine, I get that. But they both left in January. We've seen James Ward-Prowse in the number 10 too often. Kudus was at the African Nations. Bowen was injured. Paqueta was injured. We've had Ward-Prowse in the number 10 role. Sorry if I've already said that, but we've had James Ward-Prowse in the number 10 role. And lastly, we've had Ben Johnson playing right wing and left wing in a couple of games this season. He's opted for all those things ahead of giving George Earthy an opportunity. Now, there's no evidence or that if you put him in January, this would have happened. He would have gone on to have a big part of the season. But I just think it was almost easy to give him an opportunity earlier in the season. We didn't give him it to him. And there was a bit of me after the game on Saturday that I thought, well, why have we done this earlier on? While the January transfer window was disappointing, yes, it was. But as soon as that's shut, that's where you should be looking at your squad going, well, what can I do with the players I've got in order to rectify the issues I've got, especially at left wing and sometimes attacking midfield. And you've got, essentially, he had 2 options. He either had Maxwell Cornet, try and get a tune out of him, or he had youngsters, and that would be George Earthy. And there was a little bit of me that left Saturday disappointed that it's taken until, well, we saw him against Fulham, admittedly, but that was because we're 2-0 down. It was a last throw of the dice. Let's just put him on and hope he does something. It's the last 2 home games of the season. I just thought, well, surely there could have been more opportunity for George Earthy earlier on in the season. And you just never know. If that could have happened the first time he played back in February or something, then Moyes would have had Earthy for the remainder of the season. I just found it a little bit frustrating because Leverkusen away first, and I'm not saying you start him at Leverkusen away before someone misquotes that, but the attacking players were on their arse with 20, 30 minutes to go. There was just nobody to bring on for them. It was Ings or Cornet. We ended up bringing on Ben Johnson for Kudus with 10 minutes to go. And you just think, if only we tried him earlier on this season. You just never know. And that's the negative thought I've got, Frankie.
Yeah, he does look lightweight. And I think that's something that I would really have put Moyes off. We did need a little extra spark. Like you say, we looked to the bench loads of times in the back end of that season and just thought, we've got no one. Well, he is definitely someone. And I would absolutely back him to do more than those other players that were on the bench. Absolutely. In terms of someone who wants to come in, prove theirself, who's hungry, and that's the thing. He may be lightweight, but what sets him aside to the other youngsters in that team at the moment, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I'm just saying this is an example for in Earthy's case. He looks like he's got a baby face, and everyone thinks he is this soft, whatever type of player because he's a bit lightweight with it. But you meet him, he has got so much ego, so much. Just he believes massively in his own ability. And you know, when you meet someone, you stand in front of them, sometimes you meet them youngsters and they're a little bit shy and they're a little bit timid. He isn't that. He has a real sparkle about him. He's just got something where he believes, and he just stands there with an aura and a presence and confidence, and all of a sudden that baby face look goes out the window and you think, actually, this is someone who's really got a bit about him, and he really does. And I think that would transfer onto the pitch, and well, we've seen it. I mean, he went in for that header and obviously what happened, but then at the weekend he's lively, he's energetic, he wants to get in front of people, even though he is a little bit smaller than, I guess, the typical Premier League player. He will not worry about going shoulder to shoulder with them and trying to put himself in the mix. So I think any concerns that we may have had, that he doesn't have the traits yet to be someone who can play a part in the Premier League, I think is wrong. And they're always going to be a little bit smaller at that age, but they have other abilities that can pull them through. And we've seen that. He found the space, he found the movement, he had more desire, he had more will to want to get there, to put that ball in the back of the net. And that's why he scored that goal. So he had so many traits that I think we could have benefited from, that we could have utilised. But we know that none of them really got a chance, and that is the shame. And I know there was a lot of cries for Cornet towards the back end of the season. Well, surely he can give us something on the left. Surely it's better trying to use him than not. I really never wanted to see Cornet on that pitch, but someone that I think we all really wanted to see was George Earthy. So we finally got to see it, all too little, too late, which was massively unfortunate. But like you say, who knows? If he come on and he gave the rest of the side a bit of a lift, and he gave the fans a bit of a lift and everything else, things may have looked a little bit different. And it is a little bit frustrating, I guess.
And now let's do the hopeful thing. Before we do that, though, Martin Noble just told a little story about George Earthy, which I thought was quite nice. I'm just going to put it. We're not going to discuss it. I'm just going to put it out there for those that haven't seen it or heard it. Noble said that when he was captain, when he was playing, he was captain, and he went into training one day, and George Earthy was 15 at this time. Basically asked Noble if he would kindly spend time with him, going over his clips and just give him advice. Basically, Earthy wanted to learn, and he used Mark Noble and said, "Oh, Skipper, would you mind?" So Mark obviously went in with George and looked at his clips and gave him a little bit of advice on how he could do better. And I like that. It's a little story. It's nothing significant, but to have that attitude at 15 years old, to ask the first team captain who's been around the club for such a long time, say, "Excuse me, can you give up some of your time to come in the video room with me and just go over my footage and give me a little bit of feedback?" I don't know. I quite like that. But I'll tell you what I am hopeful for, Frankie, because I don't think Moyes is wrong when he sort of suggests that a small squad is better than a big squad. I actually tend to agree, especially if you don't have European football like we do next season. I think a smaller squad is better. The issue I have is not utilising every player in a small squad. If you're going to have 16, 17 senior players, you've got to use all 16, 17, and the rest of the numbers can be made up with your youngsters. Because I think having 2 senior players per position, and I don't mean Ben Johnson who can cover 2 positions. I mean Creswell and Emerson for left back, Johnson and Sufal for right back. That's a lot of senior players. Suddenly you're up to 22 already. Then you need a third goalkeeper, etc., etc. And I think what that does is blocks the pathway for the youngsters. It certainly makes it more difficult for the youngsters to get in when there's pressure on the manager to make those senior players work. Those players on 80, 70,000 pounds a week. And I think having a small squad really benefits the youngsters. And I'm just hoping that obviously Lopetegui will have been watching on Saturday, whether he was in the ground or not. I don't know. He was probably banned from the ground as well. But even if he was watching at home, Earthy's definitely going to put himself on the radar of Lopetegui for next season, and him and Potts, especially in pre-season, I think might have a really big say. And that's kind of what I'm hopeful for. That while I'm grumbling about what could have been done in the past, well, what difference could him scoring on Saturday do for the future? And that is, maybe he's just said to Lopetegui, hey, I'm here. Before you go spending loads of money in the transfer window, obviously players like Paqueta leave, you're going to have to go replace him. You can't just promote Earthy to replace Paqueta. But make me part of your squad. You have your 16, 17 senior players, myself, Casey, Potts. We can be the other 3 or 4 that you need to get through. And that's what gives me hope a little bit, actually, that we can see more of Earthy next season. And even if he just makes 5 starts and 10 substitute appearances in the Premier League, that would be incredible for him. I think that would be big progress. That's a lot of minutes for a youngster. And that's what I'm hoping for, because we've got, let's just call it the golden generation. I don't really want to call it that, because for these players to go on and do better than Ferdinand, Lampard and Carrick and Cole, I mean, that's some ass. I don't wish to sort of compare them to that generation. But we've got a few youngsters that might make it Premier League football. Only a few. I don't think they all will. I think there's 2, 3, 4, if you're lucky, will make it. But I think Earthy is at top of the list. And like I said, I put Orford in there as well. I think those are the 2 for me. But I don't know. I've just got a little bit of hope for next season. We might see these youngsters, because of lack of European football, means we're probably going to have to trim the squad a little bit and fill it up with the young players. And I'm hoping that Earthy can benefit from that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a weird one. When you compare those 2 generations of youngsters coming through, both the FA Cup winning young sides, I think the difference that I can see mostly between then and now, and I've actually had this criticism of our youth setup for the past probably 10 years, I'd say, and it's that when you read stories from back, I remember it just as a kid. Obviously, that was a golden generation for me as a kid supporting West Ham. You had such exciting players, idols, Carrick and Cole, and it really was an exciting time. So you took everything in. And we used to get the Overland and Sea magazine outside the ground and all those bits and pieces. So you did, even though it wasn't the social media generation, you did still get to stories and you got to hear what was going on in and around the club. And one that really stands out was the Jermaine Defoe one. And obviously Defoe was a really small player. But there was this story about how they was getting him to run with his chest out, how they was developing him to be solid and strong on the ball, even though he was a small player. And when he came through, he was like a little... he had so much aggression. He had so much strength about him for a small player. He could really get his back to players and give him a bit of a nudge and give him a push. And he totally counterbalanced that sort of weakness that he had about him by being trained in the right way. And we had other players that had exactly the same. And those players come through and they looked like men. Even though they were young, they looked like fully well-stocked, fully grown men that they'd filled out. And I've just felt like everyone that's wanted to come through, and all those players that we've had over the last 10 years, whether it be Nathan Holland or whoever it is that you want to name, they always seemed too lightweight. And then they got to the squad and it looked like that's what really let them down. And I just feel like I look at that young side that we've got at the moment and I don't feel enough of them look like men yet. I don't know whether we develop them quite in the right way like we used to. When Rio come through and Carrick, they just looked like they could handle themselves in the Premier League. And I haven't seen that from any of our youngsters that have come through in recent times. And that's my only worry, is that I'm not sure we do train them to have that. Maybe it's a different time. Maybe football's different now.
I think
We know
it's
that
lack of reserve team football.
could be that, and they're not having that physicality. Could be that. It could be what they do in the gym. It could be a mentality thing. So I've went to the Cholton training ground facility recently because my boy sponsored Connor Coventry, and went down there and we have a look, and it's just a new way of thinking youngsters in football. It's a bit softer. And we see it in management. Managers have to be a bit softer, because if managers are more vocal and then players get upset by it and stuff like that. So I don't know whether it is this mentality thing that they just don't have that bit of that, almost that Roy Keane bite, or that Puyo, or you name some of them players from the past. They had that bit of oomph about them, and that, no, get off it, it's my ball. You know, Rio Ferdinand, how he used to play in them days, he still had that Rolls Royce footballing ability, but he still had that bit of grit about him. He had that bit of aggression. The youngsters don't seem to have that aggression anymore, and I don't know whether that's something that maybe lets it down. But I look at that team, and I've been saying all season that as much as I want some of them to come through, and it's obviously a good crop of young players, because you don't win your league and you don't win the FA Youth Cup without being good, I still looked at a lot of them and thought, yeah, you don't look like you're big enough to play in the Premier League. And that was my biggest problem. And there wasn't many that I could pick out and go, you're ready, you're ready, you're ready. So as much as we're sitting here and we're criticising some of them not being brought through and not getting game time, after watching, and I watched them in that Ebbsfleet, I've watched them a lot of games, but Ebbsfleet stands out to me. The reason it stands out to me is that Ebbsfleet beat them 2-1, and Ebbsfleet manhandled them like you couldn't believe. It looked like men v boys. And I know lower league football, it's probably a bit more rough and ready and a bit more aggressive than the Premier League. But if Ebbsfleet's players could be too strong for that crop of players there, then it's highly likely that the Premier League is going to be too much for them. So that was my criticism. But again, the only way that you're going to find out, the only way they're going to grow into it, is by giving them some minutes. And we've just not done that enough. And I do hope that there will be an opportunity for them moving forward, because we've clearly got some serious ability down there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't Wickham in the... Is it still the Papa John's? What's it called now? That EFL trophy. Was it the Papa John's?
Sure.
I feel like they've changed it. It used to be the Papa John's. Anyway, and it was Johnson's Paint and something. I don't know. When Wickham beat us this season, I thought that it was a mismatch in terms of physicality, and the only player I thought that looked okay playing with those types of players was actually Kadua, who then literally the next day went on loan to Wickham. So clearly he must have impressed him in that game that much. It was a case of, like, can we get this done now so we can have him for the rest of the season? And I think that's what makes Freddie Potts' loan, he won Player of the Year at Wickham, to be very impressive. So not only has he got the ability, but he can do it physically in the middle of the pitch as well. And I think that's what gives me hope for Potts this pre-season, that he can get a little bit of game time in the friendlies, and we can see what he's about and see if he can stick around next season or go on loan to the Championship and get that loan right, unlike the Callum Marshall one, which was just chaos from the club, really, putting Marshall to West Brom aside in the playoffs of the Championship. It was always a silly place to put him. But even that game, and I watched nearly every minute of Marshall in a West Brom shirt. It wasn't difficult. There wasn't many. But I think it was Southampton he came on against for the last 20 minutes or something. And I think it finished 0-0, or West Brom were losing 1 or 2-0. West Brom needed a goal. He came on up front. And now, obviously, a little bit of context here. Southampton centre-backs, one of them is Benderek, who's like 6 foot, right? Most of us will look small next to Benderek, right? But watching Marshall run around next to the Southampton defenders, it was almost difficult to watch, actually, because he was so short but skinny as well, and it was just a breeze for the Southampton defence. At one point he went on a run, and I can't remember, it might have been Harwood Bellis came over and just pun intended, marshalled him out the way, and I was a bit like, oh, okay, that was underwhelming. Like he did his best. It was just a bit of a reminder that he's got some way to go before he's able to play first team football. But Anton Ferdinand's convinced it's because there's no reserve football and they play with their own age group, and it's like, bang, now you're in the men's changing room, you're going to get shouted at, you're going to get sworn at, standards have gone up, you're going to get kicked about in training, now let's see what you can do. But in the academy, it's not really like that, and it's quite like a softer game, and so they go from one environment to the other, whereas when they had reserve team football back in Anton Ferdinand's day, the environment was the same, so you get kicked to ribbons in the reserve game, then you go play in the first team, and the game was the same. You're up against the same sort of physicality of player, and you were quite often, you'd have first team players in the reserves because they were either not playing or they were coming back to fitness, and they didn't want to be there. And this is what Ferdinand often says, that when a first team player was in the reserves, it was almost like a little bit of an embarrassment factor. They wanted to be in the first team, so they had to play well in reserves to get out of that reserve team. Whereas now, if you're in the first team and you're not playing, like Cornet, you just don't play. You don't go play reserve team football. You just go to training with the rest of the first team and then sit on the bench on Saturday. But back in that day, Monday night or whatever, you were playing reserve team football if you didn't play on the Saturday, and they didn't like it. It was almost like a little bit of, like I said, embarrassment, and so there was a bit of aggression there. But Anton's convinced it's because there's no reserve team football now. That's what prevents the youngsters being ready physically for the Premier League. Anything else you'd like to add, Frankie?
I guess the only other little story that's been banning about is Flynn Downs at the moment, because he's another one we could have suggested putting in that midfield, but obviously with the situation that he's got going on at the moment, it seems like he wants away, which is a bit of a shame. And it's a bit frustrating that we keep doing this with our own, if you like, because he is a West Ham boy. Yeah, it seems a real wasted opportunity. It seems like he is certainly someone that if you said to me this season, who would you have preferred as a backup in that midfield? He's someone that I would have loved to have around to come on when we were short or we had suspensions or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I'm a bit disappointed with that, to be honest. But if he wants to go then, and he's found somewhere he's comfortable and he's found somewhere he's happy, then I guess it's just... I'm always of that belief that if someone don't want to be here and they want to be someone else, then off you pop.
So are you hoping Southampton come up so they can then buy him for 15 million, say, or are you hoping they fail in the playoffs so then we retain Flynn Downs? That's on the assumption, of course, they can't afford him or won't sanction that payment for him if they stay in the Championship. That's a bold assumption. I appreciate that. But let's just say that hypothetical situation was true. Would you like to see Southampton promoted?
Not really. If I'm honest, I was a lot of people weren't disappointed with Leeds getting relegated. I think Leeds are a proper football club. I think they are. I do. It's probably the worst away experience, one of the worst away experiences I've had. Leeds are very, very lively. As a boy, it was one of the, and I could only have been, 12, 13, and coming off that coach up there, it was lively, and it was certainly something that made you take a bit of a step back as a young lad. But I just think that the noise they make, that stadium they've got, they're just one of them last of the old school football clubs that have still got that right character around them. So I like Leeds. I'd rather see Leeds come back up. I think it's a good away game, and I'd like to see him there. The way he spoke suggested that he would go there no matter what. It suggested he'd go there even if they stay in the Championship. It suggested actually that he'd take a pay cut to go there. It sounded like the way he said about him, he'd go there for free and play for nothing, because he couldn't have been any more complimentary about every single aspect of Southampton, which is weird.
Understandably, though, I think, because
if you're still signed to a club, say that you've had a really good time there, say that it's been a really good spell for you and you've enjoyed playing football again. But you don't have to say, I mean, he basically even thanked the canteen staff. He went through every single aspect of Southampton saying, I love every single little detail about it. So I think that was probably a bit strong.
I always flip it, right? I always flip it if this was West Ham. So I'm going to flip that. And if that was a West Ham loan player, how would I feel? And I'd love to hear that from whoever we had on loan. They've been here a year. They've absolutely smashed it out of the park. We've taken to him. He's taken to us. The manager, Russell Martin literally called him the best midfielder in the Championship, which it's up for debate, but he's up there for the conversation. He's been in Championship 2 the last 3 seasons, and he's been the best midfielder. He's been in the top 5 centre midfielders both times, so he's definitely a really good player in that league. But I just flip it, and I think if that was a West Ham player that we had on loan, I'd love to hear that. And I get why he's doing it. He's sort of, he hasn't closed the door on West Ham per se, but when you look at how he fared last season, I appreciate the manager's going. I appreciate that the manager responsible is on his way out. I can understand why he might think, actually, I feel much more appreciated to hear this. I'm a big West Ham fan, but this feels like home to me. I get it. He's playing every week. He's very important to Southampton. The manager's just described him as one of the best in his position. It's hard. It would be hard for him not to think, you know what, after the year I've had of getting a couple of games, doing well, and then sitting back on the bench again, I don't want to go back, thank you very much. It was a dream come true for him, joining his boyhood club. But I imagine it was pretty disappointing. It probably hits him harder than most because it's his dream move, and then he doesn't feel like he's getting a fair crack. It must sting twice to some extent. If he goes, I wish him all the best, and if he doesn't, I hope he makes a claim. I'm not sure we've got room for Downs and Potts next season, though, because Ward-Prowse, Souček, Alvarez, Potts, Downs, and Andy Irvine, who's currently in Austria. We signed him. He's coming back in the summer, whether we want him to or not. But we've got decisions to make with these players. I'm just not sure there's enough football to go around for all those players next season. And before people say, oh, sell Souček, I'm on board with that. However, I wouldn't replace Souček with Flynn Downs. If we were to sell Souček, I'd like us to go and sign a substantial centre midfielder to come in there. So I think there's maybe only room for one of Downs. If there was room for one of Downs or Flynn, Downs or Potts, who would you choose?
Oh, that's a tough one.
So I think your options would be keep Potts and sell Downs, or keep Downs and loan out Potts. You'd have to sell Potts, but you can loan him out for a season. What would you?
I would probably have Downs around for one more season and loan out Potts again. I know he was their best player this season and everything else. I'm not totally sure he's there yet. I think Downs is capable of playing. I think he's shown it this season. I think he's capable of playing top level football. I haven't seen it. So going by what I've seen and what I know, I would say that I'd rather Downs because I'm more confident that he can do it. But you might get your wish, Geo, with the glowing reference of a West Ham player on loan, because we haven't had Calvin Phillips's interview yet. So when that comes out, he might, give a glowing reference. You never know.
Anyway, right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. As I always say, if you make it to the end of the podcast, which is over half an hour long, you must have enjoyed it to some extent. So please be kind and drop a like on it by clicking thumbs up. Keeps Frankie coming back, so I appreciate that. Subscribe when you're new to Hammers Chat, and Frankie, I'll catch up with you next week.
See you later, mate.